Lan, can you hear me first of all?
Yes, indeed.
Fantastic. Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much, Lan, and welcome to everyone today. My name is John David, and I am the CEO for Amnic Social Enterprise. We are a collection of city leaders, mayors, 110 tech companies, universities, businesses, and we love collaborating. But anyway, I'm here today as your MC because I am so excited with this fantastic, great Cybersecurity Symposium 2020. Wow, this is such a wonderful feeling to be sharing this event with you and taking you through it. It's my complete pleasure, and my thanks to Lan and team for nominating me. So I think it's worth explaining to everyone that you've probably seen the program, you've seen the agenda. We have a great collection of leading figures from the industry who are all going to be sharing their knowledge and experience with you. So I think the next 3 days are going to be absolutely brilliant because there's an opportunity to learn, to develop, and together aspire for better. From the program, you would have seen that we have panel discussions, we have keynote speakers, we have roundtable events. So we have some amazing things happening on the menu, which include networking and fun things. So we're in for a really exciting time, and I just can't wait to get started. So I'm not going to be too long on this here before I hand you all back shortly, but I do want to just pick up a couple of quick points, which I think are worth raising here. I wanted to spend a couple of moments just to focus on the purpose of this event. And as you've probably seen from the video just played to you, a lot has changed since 2019. A lot of things have changed since that period of time. And the team with Lan and the keynote speakers and the back office staff, etc., have given it some real deep thinking in terms of what do we need to play out over these 3 days that are going to help the governments, that's going to help the businesses, the communities, everyone in these difficult times that we're going through. So I think for me, what it's coming down to, the purpose of the event is going to be is that recognition that COVID has affected us all and it's begun to show us gaps in technologies. So this is a great place to be. There are gaps in technologies. Well, we want to help fill some of those gaps. It's also helping us through this event in terms of getting us to refocus and rediscover our real needs for society. Because some of these have lost their way a little bit. We need to maybe bring them back in focus and really work through what are the real needs. And again, the program is here to articulate that. In my conversation with Lan a couple of days ago, I was trying to ask Lan, how do we just try and sort of condense this, and what is the main theme and purpose of this event? And I think Lan has sort of articulated it pretty much in sort of few words, which is about the one world through technologies. This is what we're trying to get to, and hopefully that's going to be the glue that pulls us together for the next 3 days. So now, putting all that together, I think I would just quickly like to focus on you, the audience. Today is Wednesday. What were you doing last Wednesday? What were you doing the Wednesday before that? Well, I'll be honest with you, I do not know what I had for breakfast yesterday. So, but today is Wednesday. Today is Wednesday. This is the Wednesday that you need to worry about. Today is a day that can change your organization. It can change the way you think. It can help your communities. It can help your businesses. What I'm trying to get to is don't expect this to be another Wednesday. Don't go into next week and say, oh, I can't remember what happened Wednesday, because you need to remember next Wednesday. This is the Wednesday you need to remember next week and the weeks to come. You need to remember Thursday and Friday, because these are all great days coming ahead. Through all of this, what I'm trying to get you to do is take away one or two things from today's event tomorrow's event, the following day's event, and see how much of that can you carry forward into your workspace, into your environment, into your communities, into your businesses. And then I want you to do something for me. I want you to do something. When you have taken any of these things forward, I want you to come back to me in the following weeks and months and to LAN and say, hey, you know what? That event was great. I've put this, and this in because I've learned it from that, I've learned it from that, I've learned it from that. When you do that, I want to know about it because we have a magazine. We have a magazine called City Pulse, which is going out to 10 million LinkedIn members in AI, IoT, digital technology, cyber, blah, 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 blah. But listen, if you've got good news stories that come through as a result of this event, LAN needs to know, I need to know. We want to feature it. So that's good stuff. So that's all I want to say to the audience, and very quickly to the speakers, to the roundtable guests, etc. Guys, let's keep it tight. Let's stick to the schedule. You'll get a 5-minute warning. You'll get a 2-minute warning, and boof, you'll just be gone. You'll be gone by magic. So hold on to that. Let's put it together, and we're going to have a great time. That's all I need to say. So I want to welcome everyone. Welcome the next set of colleagues coming through, and I think we're going to kick off with the GCTC Smart and Secure Cities and Communities Overview and Killer Apps. I'd like to hand it back to you guys.
Thank you so much, John David. And I think you make a great point, which is there's been so much planning done here. And having looked at the agenda, I know that all of us are going to learn from it. So it's terrific, and we're really happy to be here. And I want to welcome everyone to join us on this panel on the Global Cities Team Challenge, Killer Apps and an Overview. I'm Jean Rice. I'm with the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, which is a part of Commerce. And I specialize in smart cities and communities. Today, our group is going to kind of do a deep dive for you on kind of the whole aspects of the Global Cities Team Challenge and how we like to see things progress in the future. So I'm asking my group to do a little vision as well as talk about what they're actually doing on the ground today. And we just have a terrific group in GCTC. I should mention that, this particular conference is part of that whole GCTC work, including the blueprints that have been done, the guidelines that help cities in cybersecurity and privacy. It's just a way of working through smart cities, learning as we go, and developing best practices so we don't all start from scratch. So I want to thank LAN and Adaptable Security and the Cybersecurity Advisory Committee for GCTC for hosting this and for inviting us to come. And I have just a terrific group of speakers to talk today, so I think it'll be fun as you learn more about what's happening with GCTC. And we hope that there is a place for you folks to also be a part of the work that we're doing. So our speakers today are Soku Ri, who's an Associate Director of Cybersecurity, Cyber Physical Systems Program at NIST, and he directs the GCTC program. So he's in touch with people worldwide on smart cities innovation and activities and KPIs. So I think that it'll be great to hear from him. We also have Limor Sheffman, who's the president of Keystone Tech Group and the co-chair of the Smart Building Supercluster, who can really tell you and has thought well with her team on what is a built environment and what does it mean in the smart city context now and in the future. So I think it's just going to be great. We have John Walton coming on, who is the Chief Information Officer of San Mateo County. He's also the co-chair of the Wireless Supercluster and active in the Education Supercluster. And John has been, one of the leaders, and he is looking at what's happening in his county. He's been working regionally and nationally on a number of issues, including the latest one on inclusiveness and equity. So I'll be anxious to hear from him as well. And we've got Len Jensen, of course, who all of you know, who's the CEO of Adaptable Security and co-chair of the Cybersecurity and Privacy Committee. And this is I would say this is a thought leader group. And if you work with GCTC, one of the benefits is you find partners in industry and in universities, companies, cities, states, and the federal government who all are working towards the goal of having quality of life improved, cost savings, better economic development, workforce development, kind of the whole host of things that we work for generally in smart cities. So I'd like to turn it over to you, Soku, to kind of give us an overview of GCTC.
Sure. Thanks, everyone. And it's great to see all of you and everybody in the world. First, I just want to point out that the John's opening was like the opening of the Saturday Night Live, so which was great. So we gotta keep up with the expectation. Okay, so let's do that. Jean, and thanks for your introduction. I am Seok-Woo Ri, and I work for National Institute of Standards and Technology, which is also a part of the U.S. Department of Commerce. And I primarily work on smart cities and Internet of Things. And specifically, I lead the Global City Teams Challenge program. And also there another smart city program called the Smart Cities and Communities Framework program. It's my pleasure to be here because when I started GCTC 5 years ago, it was essentially a vision, and it was discussed among only a handful of pioneers, including the chairs of GCTC superclusters that we are seeing right now. And I'm so happy to see that we have, as a group, we were able to grow this activity to the global level. I just want to point out that why we are even talking about the cybersecurity in the context of smart city. So there are a lot of discussions on cybersecurity. There are a lot of discussions on smart city, but then there are not many discussions on how to combine those two. What does that exactly mean? And then when you combine it, is it like you can just simply put those things together, or you got to have a process? You got to pay attention to where and how they can be integrated together. So I think that's, at least my take is, this conference is about that, which is serving a critical point or even underserved point that we all want to see happen. So I'm glad to be here, and I'm looking forward to discussions with everybody else. Thanks.
Okay, let me turn it over to you, Limor.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And thank you, Lan, for putting this conference on. Phenomenal. To Jean for inviting me to be part of this, and Lan as well. Very excited. And to just build on what Seok-Woo was talking about. So Limor Schaffman, President of Keystone Tech Group, but also most importantly here, the co-chair of the Global City, the Smart Building Supercluster. And I think the way we're thinking about smart buildings, so just so you know, we're one of multiple clusters. Each cluster is dealing with a different topic, i.e. cybersecurity, that Lan is involved in co-chairs. We also have the wireless that John is part of, data, mobility, transportation, etc. So there are a number of superclusters. Each one of them has a particular prospect and perspective that they bring to the smart city context. From a smart buildings perspective, we think about it as we live in the built environment. Most of us, about 80 to 90% of our lives are taking place within and around a building of some type. It doesn't matter if you're in a small town, in a rural environment, all the way to the major metropolises. So the question is, what kind of framework do we want to live in? And I think now, particularly, and we're going to probably discuss this as a panel further, given the situation where we are now and the great pause, I will say, that we've had as a result of the pandemic, we have this opportunity to really rethink how we want to be. And our built environment infects us both from an economic perspective, a social perspective, a psychological and emotional health perspective. And as we're looking forward to what we want to do going forward and how we want to live, work, and play going forward, we have the capability now, because we're dealing with an increasingly digitized environment, to in fact reframe how we live. Our entire design of spaces is changing. We'll talk about that further. So we have an incredible future in front of us, and great importance in front of us, to think about what kind of values and principles do we want to bring into the built environment? Do we want to have reflected in the built environment? And then, okay, now how do we make that happen? How do we get that to happen? Both from a materials perspective, a policy perspective, a use of technology perspective, the integration perspective that Seok-Woo was mentioning, and really to have a holistic view of the built environment, and again, how we implement it and go forward. And so I would say that one of the things that we advocate as the Smart Building Supercluster is very much an interoperable, integrated, holistic, future forward kind of view, which really does actually focus on the human people, us, the citizens of this built environment, to support it. The smart building, smart cities are platforms, and now how do we develop a platform to really support us in the way that we want to live? I look forward to the future conversation.
Great, thanks, Limor. John?
Thanks, Jean. Good morning, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here. Like Saku said, I'm John Walton. I'm the CIO for San Mateo County out here in California. It's great to be with everyone today. Yeah, I have to give a lot of credit. I was sitting here thinking this morning, we were fortunate, and I can't even remember the history now because like the moderator said, I can't remember what I had for lunch yesterday, so it's probably no surprise. But I can't remember how we originally got involved with GCTC in this. It's sort of lost in the fog of time. But it was really fortunate for us as a county and as a region out here in California to get involved early on. I think initially, we, like a lot of government agencies, were just thinking about the whole innovation journey and how do we take our government communities from sort of the old model of doing things and trying to catch up and modernize and take advantage of all the emerging IoT technology and smart technology out there. And so, we did get involved. I was very fortunate to be included in my staff, who did a great job contributing a lot to the wireless supercluster. Lan was very generous and included us in some of the conversations around the cybersecurity one, and we learned a lot from her and her group. Limor has been a great ally to us as we build a lot of buildings out here and giving us ideas about how to make smart buildings. Sort of in my spare time as a volunteer, I'm on a school board, so the education supercluster is nice enough to let me sit in on some of theirs because I have a passion for education and how technology integrates with that. And then we were kind of going down this path in the superclusters, and not silos, but just kind of what I think was more future thinking about where we wanted to be in society and a community. And then, of course, COVID came along and disrupted the entire thought process, at least for us here in my government, and I know for a lot of other ones. And it really caused us, one, to reevaluate, what we were doing and how we were doing it and what was important and what the critical things were versus the nice to have things. And I'm really happy to say, the learnings we had already had and work we'd been engaged in with the GCTC groups really turned out to be invaluable. On the cybersecurity front, when we sent all the workers home, kind of rethinking the security model and how we're going to secure all those conversations and connections. With the education piece, as it was alluded to, we got really engaged with the school districts and the community about when all the families go home to work from home and the students are trying to distance learn, then all those pieces that we had been studying and trying to understand around connectivity and the best technologies to connect the community really became critical because we were really trying to solve that problem about how to better connect the community in a pandemic shelter-in-place situation where it was just critical people have sufficient bandwidth and access to health data, to telemedicine, to education. So I think, where we're at in a journey as GCTC is really fascinating. And I know I've sat in on some of the chair meetings where we've talked about what our future focus is. And I think it's good. I think every organization, every group like this goes through an evolution of a thought process about where we start and the progress we make, and then a disruptive event like a pandemic comes along. And it causes us to reevaluate where we're at and where we want to be in the future. And I think that's where we're at today. And for me, this conference is an important opportunity to share what's happened up till now and also engage in that conversation with the larger community about where should we be in the future. So I'm really excited about this conference. I really appreciate being part of it and look forward to the conversations like Limor said.
Jean, you are muted.
Thanks, John. Okay, I'll turn it over to you, Lan.
Thank you. I'm just so honored and in awe as I listen to you, everyone, in my previous life, I would never have imagined that leaders like yourselves and also leaders in our audience could come together and accomplish something of this magnitude, all for $0 budget. Well, at least for the nonprofit side, it's all the people who have pulled this together are volunteers. So it's one person's not able to do something, but together, one person contributes 1 hour here, 1 hour there. Together, we can do so much. So this event, I'm just opening up my mind and be ready to absorb a lot more of the positive energy and goodwill, and harvest also the desire to take actions. I think after COVID-19, it has given us, the leaders also in GCTC, a pause to say, hey, are we in the right direction? Is something not in the limelight before that should be? And what are they? Let's rediscover this and connect with our communities. So the initiative under GCTC is called Smart Cities and Communities Challenge. And so together, if we get the conversation going and have a few action items to follow up on from this conference, I think that is mission accomplished, and I trust we can. Thank you, Jean.
Well, that's great, Len. And I think it was the perfect segue to the first question I have for all of you, which is, if you look around the nation and the states and the cities, everyone is talking about recovery. How can we make this happen? How can we look at a new view of how to make things better? And so I'm just wondering, from each of your perspectives, how do you think GCTC can help these smart cities and communities, or those who are aspiring in the area, to work on recovery with a mind to long-term resilience? I'll leave it open.
If it's okay, I'll jump in first, Jean. I think, one of the things I've been reflecting on a lot, and Rob Lloyd and I were talking about this the other day, the CIO from San Jose. I think there's two different views, or there are definitely more than two different, but I would say there's a sort of one trend is that how do we get back to the way we were before, which is recovery looks like, let's get back exactly, let's get everybody back in the offices, let's just return to the baseline of what we were before the pandemic happened. And how do we leverage technology and our learnings to recover as quickly as possible to get back to that previous state? And then there's another school of thought that I think probably has more and more people engaged in the conversation about is, obviously the pandemic and the deaths and the impact it's had on the economy and communities has been a terrible thing. But, there have been some things that we've seen that I think a lot of people are saying, well, what did we learn from that? Whether it's people don't have to drive as much, so the roads are less crowded. Air quality is better because there's fewer cars on the road. So I think there's a growing thought that maybe recovery and resilience also looks like, let's take any good pieces that came out of this. Maybe we can create a better work-life balance for employees so they don't have to be in the office as much and can spend less time in their cars and more time with their families. Maybe there's a benefit to the environment. Maybe there's cost savings from having to construct fewer buildings and fewer roads. I think those types of things, when we talk about resilience, I think part of resilience for me is, what do we want to recover to, and what have we learned from it so that the next time an event comes along, we're more prepared for it. And I think there are some key things we've learned about connectivity and security that are key in situations where, whether it's a pandemic or a large earthquake or a hurricane, that can be applied in the nation.
I think, John, your guy is going to love you. You're looking at bright side of this whole crisis and trying to turn it into a more positive actions. I love that. So there have been a lot of discussions about the goals of smart cities, obviously, even before this crisis. But after this crisis, discussions I expect, is going to change. Probably the main goal will stay the same, but how we get there and how to improve the quality of life of residents, that methodologies may slightly shift. And I was really inspired by what John said the other day in our internal meeting, that cities needs to look at practical issues, more practical issues going forward. I mean, it's not like cities have not looked at practical issues, but a lot of the things we talk about in smart cities are very future looking, and there's nothing wrong about it. That's how innovations happen. But at the same time, there are existing needs. There is imminent needs that we need to fill out, and we can do it better using advanced technologies. And then it's not like we have to look at 30 years from now. There are things we want to do today, but we can do it differently using more productive tools and more efficient ways of doing it. And that really struck a chord for me. And I think a lot of cities will think along the same line as what John said. And I'm hoping the providers and companies, universities may also have to think, how can it solve the problems that we have today using better technologies and tools.
So I'll build on that, Soku, and John. What strikes me is that I think it's important for us to pay attention to other elements of the trends that we're seeing. And that is that we are now, what I anticipate, I'll just give my personal opinion of what we're going to see going forward. It's not going to be a reduced environment in which we're going to be living, but an expanded and extended one, in the sense that it's going to be blended. So this virtual experience that we're living right now, or a partially virtual experience, is just going to keep on, and it's going to become increasingly a part of our lives, and it's going to become increasingly sophisticated with augmented reality, and I'll call XR, so multiple different kinds of shades of virtualized data is going to impact our lives, both in our buildings, outside our buildings, etc. And so the question is, how do we enable this? This is where we are now, what we're seeing now. It's just going to be, it's part of it, and it's just going to be increasingly a part of it. So then, if we're going to make this, if this is going to be part of our lives, how do we enable it? One of the things that we need to have is communications infrastructure. One of the things we need to have is communications infrastructure that is accessible for all people, wherever they live. And so, and this is very important from an educational perspective, of course, and we've seen that to the detriment of many students of all ages, including adults, when they don't have access to that. And so there's a question then, what kind of policies do we put in place in order to enable that? So I think we're looking at a realization of what is now going to be the new future. I've only offered one perspective on that. 2, what are the technologies, as you were saying, Soku, that are going to enable this? And then 3, all right, then what are the policies and implementation capabilities of the cities to, in fact, execute on that? And there are immediate things, but there also needs to be an overall integrated perspective on this. Otherwise, and John, I would love to hear more from you about this. Otherwise, you're picking and choosing like quick one-off projects, as opposed to really being able to build for that future. So how do you balance that? That's a question I have for you, John, because I would love to hear about that. So I think that we need to step into this new future. There is no going back to where we were, but there are great possibilities and opportunities in what we see coming forward.
John, let me throw it back to you then to just a quick answer to Lamore's question.
Lamore, you bring up a really good point, and I'll try to be brief, because that's for me, it's a really deep philosophical one that I could probably burn the rest of our time, and I want to leave time for more conversation. I think, I have had the good fortune of working both in public sector and private sector. And when I come back to public sector, every time I'm often asked, what's the difference between public sector and private sector? And, I would not say to my private sector friends, because I love working with them on GCTC, but private sector is actually a little bit easier, I think, because goals are very defined. You get to pick your customers. Your metrics are very, straightforward. A lot of what we do in government, to your point, is we don't get to pick and choose. We have to provide solutions and show a benefit to everyone equally. And that's kind of gets to Jean's comment earlier about equity. How do we leverage some of the things we're doing in GCTC? And Saku was being nice. I was probably a little more blunt in our conversations around smart cities. I think the example I used was, before the pandemic, I was worried about, how to help all the Tesla drivers find parking so they could shop more. And then the pandemic hit, and suddenly I was worried about those kids that can't get an education. And it was really a wake-up call for me, not that either are bad, but that there is really an equity lens you have to apply to what we do to ensure that there's equal benefit to where we're spending our time. And I love the forward-looking stuff. Jean will tell you I love drones, drone delivery, things like that. I'm fascinated by all that, because that's why I got into technology. But I also had to stop and think to myself, how are the things we're doing in government using, sometimes federal funding, state funding, local funding, and creating solutions, brainstorming for the future? How are they benefiting everyone? And it's not always going to benefit everyone every time, but I think you have to think that through. When we talk about building buildings, like when we collaborate with you, I'm rethinking workspaces for my employees, but I'm also now thinking about customer engagement and the public coming in and how to keep them safe, not just for this pandemic, but future ones. What does it mean for our buildings, for our community as a whole? When we did public Wi-Fi, we were doing it in community centers, thinking everyone was going to come together. Obviously, that doesn't work in a pandemic because you don't want everyone to come together. So now we're having to rethink our whole public Wi-Fi strategy in the context of, we want people to be socially distant. So I think those are really good questions, Lamore. And, I would suggest, Jean, we have a whole panel on that sometime. And
I think it's a great idea. And I have to add on, we've started this Smart Regions initiative through GCTC. And we have regions all over the country and a couple overseas. And they're working on the idea of how do we do a recovery strategy across the region. Some have come up with checklists on how to work on it. And they are working on different things, maybe a holistic view, like in Washington, or looking at public safety as they're doing Lake Tahoe, which is a 2-state area, or kind of our new group that's a state data hub region with multiple states involved. But I think the idea is that these same issues and questions that you're dealing with on a local level also expand to region. Lon, you want to add to our chat?
Thank you. Yes. As I was thinking, the regional, to your point, also later on a panel will cover a wonderful regional innovation in the cybersecurity and privacy space. So stay tuned, everyone. But that is an example of smarter working together. So there is nothing against the private sector. I think they are commended for innovating a lot of the great things. And Smart City started with the private industry thought leaders thinking ahead with technology, what can we do? And so it has evolved, right, in several generations of smart cities now. Second generation is that, hey, city and county, the governments, they want to do something, not just, hey, the private industry has a product to sell to me, then I just buy and use it. No, the governments need to have a say. And then the third generation is that, hey, it's for the people ultimately. So I borrowed a phrase from our good friend, Jonathan Lichtenthal, whose new book is called Smart Cities for Dummies. And he said, hey, many thousand years ago, Shakespeare said, what's a city but it's people? So we have been evolving, and rightfully so, evolving. This is a life cycle of innovations in a way, right? That, hey, it is about time to bring the benefits to the broader society. So it's not just a tool smart, it is community smart. So on that, back to you, Jean.
No, I think that's exactly right. In the Smart Ag and Rural Supercluster right now, they're looking at innovation. Like one of the projects in Indiana has put an aerostat up so they can meet the connectivity needs that they don't have, not only for Smart Ag and manufacturing, but for people as well. And we see innovative kind of work with young people on entrepreneurship and on putting innovators together with farmers up in Oregon. So we see a lot of innovation happening as we go forward. But part of the issue is, we have some great products, and GCTC, I think, has been a forefront globally. But how do we take it to that next level? What's our killer lab app? What's the thing that's going to hit it out of the park to make adoption grow, and to make sure we're thinking about, as we go forward, that it's equitable and inclusive? Lamore, you want to start with that one?
Sure, I'll start, and I'll admit immediately to a bias. So before opening Keystone Tech Group, I was part of the Smart Buildings program at the Telecommunications Industry Association. So for me, telecom and communications infrastructure is absolutely a requirement across the board. So I think the only way that we can achieve that killer app is if we have whatever that killer app is. I don't care if it's transportation, I don't care if it's sustainability, I don't care, education, whatever it is, healthcare, whatever it is, you need the communications infrastructure. So for me, it's more like the killer infrastructure, and it's all about comms. And so that's what I will advocate as something that we absolutely need to have in place robustly across the entire, to hit every single member of our society. So I would, that's what I would put forward as my answer. And out of that, then we start getting, again, education, healthcare, transportation, mobility, autonomy, et cetera, et cetera. Please.
So cool.
Yeah, so the smart city is arguably an aggregation of many different sectors: transportation, public safety, utility, and all agriculture and all that. So it's probably not easy to find a single killer app that's going to completely change the landscape of smart city. It's probably not a way to look at it. It's more about there are needs. There's a strong need to improve the infrastructure, to improve the quality of life through technology. So need is there. The question is, why are we not seeing the more of exponential growth? And we are only seeing incremental growth. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. It's just that personally, I want to see faster growth, both in the deployment and the innovation and development of smart city solutions. So why is that? So really it comes down to, I think, a couple of things. We all talk about funding issues, but it's not like there's no money in the governance, and there's always money in the government. So really question is, how do we help prioritize that money to be used for more infrastructure, more smart infrastructure? And that's not going to just happen at the policy level. There are two things. First, obviously, the government has to identify practical issues that can solve the immediate needs right now. And then if there is any solution that can help solve that problem right away, then government, we're going to gladly, I believe, John, you can probably say more than me, I believe you can gladly adopt those solutions. So that's one. And secondly, from technology innovators side, or companies, universities, you also need to look at practical issues too. Because, government, I work for the government too, it's very hard for us to develop a product as a government employee or government organization. We pretty much look at the private sector and what they are developing, and we may choose some of the solutions, adopt them. So it's very important for the private sector to look at the practical issue, not just from their technology perspective, but real issues that cities and communities and residents are facing, and come up with a solution that can address those issues and present it that way to the government entities. And I think if you can somehow make that work and identify obviously best practices and somehow replicate those best practices throughout many different sectors, I'm hoping that we can see the better adoption. And I'm not going to go into the whole privacy issue, which I believe is another big piece. So I'm going to stop there. I'm hoping others panelists going to talk about it a little bit.
Lan, you want to jump in on privacy?
Oh, sure. That is the issue of the century in a way. As we know, that different parts of the world have experimented different ways. So I have a feeling that is going to be a diverse practice worldwide. So each country may have their own cultural appropriate norms for that. But in the United States, some have argued that privacy is a fundamental foundation for democracy. And that's how this country is built. So with that, a lot of, here's a call for action. It's going to be upon the thought leaders and innovators to find a way that continue to promote and protect the privacy rights that we as a nation has enjoyed and is founded on. And in the meantime, still is able to allow us to be the innovative nation that we are. So we have brilliant thought leaders who are coming to envision that tomorrow. So I have my ears wide open to hear what they have to say.
I think that's right. And I think that is an important thing that we can bring to the international stage as well as the need for privacy. Okay, St. John, how do you want to weigh in on this?
You know, I was just sitting here reflecting, listening to everyone talk about killer apps. And, you know, I think what I've come to realize, and it's going to sound very self-serving as a CIO and technologist, that really just technology turns out to be the killer app. And I've been implementing technology solutions for 25 years now, and I've seen it go from being a very small, specialized field that was primarily used for census and things like that over the years, on Vaxes, and I remember decommissioning the Wang, to now where everyone, has incredibly powerful computers from, the time they're very young in their back pocket with cell phones. And I think, sometimes when I come to these conferences, it strikes me how we still have this love-hate relationship with technology where, for example, as Sakwu was alluding to, I just got back from a camping trip with my sons, and our biggest problem was catching the popcorn on fire. Really what we've successfully done as a community nationwide and regionally and locally is we have accomplished what we've always talked about doing, which is putting everything online. And that was a slow transition until the pandemic hit. And then we had to overnight put all education online and all these services online that may have been stuck or may have been slowly moving in that direction. But because of safety issues and things like that, we had to accomplish that overnight. But now we're here. And what does this mean to us? 6 months ago on the school board, we were debating things like how much screen time should we limit the students to or our children to. And now it's like, okay, well, you log into your Zoom classes at 8 o'clock in the morning, and you're not done till 3, and then you have homework at night. So the whole conversation has shifted for me from is technology a good or bad thing to technology is a necessary thing. And because it's necessary now, how do we more gracefully integrate that into our work and personal lives? And I think this conference, looking at privacy and security and emerging technology and smart cities, is really about that. It's really about how do we find that balance between living our lives as emotionally and physically healthy people and using technology to make that happen in a graceful way. And so for me, that's really the conversation I have with my staff and what I come to these conferences to hear about.
I think that's right. I think it really brings us back to the not tech for tech's sake. I mean, obviously you need a certain base, but you need to have a people-centric design so that it comes out with the kind of pieces that we go. One of the questions I have for all of you is kind of, trying to make the value proposition for smart cities, for all the various components we've talked about today, is difficult. But it is more difficult for vulnerable communities, and it's difficult for them. Let's say if there's going to be changes in mobility, there's going to be changes in capacity, especially let's say I work a lot with tribes in rural areas, and they haven't had it before. So there's a lot of problems in looking at equity in trusted communities, both in terms of civic engagement, so people understand what's coming, and then also training that goes forward. I'm just wondering what your thoughts are in terms of the importance of that as we go forward.
I'll jump in real quick only because the rural conversation resonates with me a lot, Gene. I think, again, it's that balance of technology versus the human element. When we started trying to use technology to address some of the digital divide issues in our more rural communities that didn't even have cell phone coverage, probably like a lot of the areas where you work with tribes, the thing that I think we intentionally or maybe even accidentally to some degree got right was we didn't lead with the technology. We really led with going out there and creating those human connections, meeting with community groups, talking to them about what they wanted, what their frustrations were. A lot of times I think in rural communities and underserved communities, they feel left out, they feel disconnected, but they also don't just want solutions imposed upon them without engaging with them and creating that conversation about what should that solution look like. And so I think we all need to take the time. A lot of us, think we know the answer to everything and we have a technology solution that solves everyone's problem. I'm guilty of that myself. And not short-circuiting that human conversation we need to have with our communities and partners about before we rush in to implement something for their good, really engage and talk about what the challenges are and what the problems they're seeing and how we can tailor those solutions so they feel like they're part of it. And I think that for me is the key, is not neglecting the human element to the technology conversation.
Mm-hmm. And Jean, if I may chime on that very briefly, to me, the killer app, to John's point, definitely technologies and innovations. The other side of the coin is also innovation that helps adoption, that helps, it's a mutual communicated, desirable way of adoption that can not allure is not the right word, but that, like a technological killer app, it just grows in adoption like wildfire. That is the call to me, that in terms of adoption, it needs to be considered a field where a innovative way should evolve over time also, that can get people into the adoption faster. So that's what GCTC, I think, the next round of evolution will also be, hopefully we'll see that showing up in the GCTC future.
Lemore?
Well, one of the things that's striking me by what John and Lon have said is something that I'm also seeing and hearing a lot from the architectural side of this industry. And we're seeing now how people are adapting their behavior to show up in a different way. So for example, because we can't necessarily gather inside of our usual community oriented buildings, we're doing so outside. So people are spending much more time outside. The cafes, live here in Alexandria. I was up in New York a couple of weeks ago. They've taken over the streets. And so now we have closed off streets. They're just for open restaurant areas. And people are really liking that. So what I'm hearing from the design community now is that they're starting to adopt this as well. And anytime that they're developing some new campuses or some new properties, I was listening to some real estate developers on the ULI conference yesterday, they're actually intentionally creating increased park space and spaces for people to be and gather outside. So I think that what we're seeing is we just need to also observe how human beings are behaving now, and we can see what their preferences are, and then we can start sort of implementing and following their guidance as well. It's basically a market talking to us and telling us what they want. And we, as the technology product service developers, and not just technology, but as the product service developers of whatever that is, whether it's policy or technology or whatever, we can listen to them and then help implement what they're already signaling us of something that they actually want to do. And the adoption's already there. They're just showing us a workaround, and we just need to make it official.
Great. Well, listen, on that note, I'm just so happy that we've had time to explore a little bit on, what some strategies are for the future, where we see needs for equity and trusted community work, both in privacy, cybersecurity, and other pieces. And it is all part of the Global Cities Team Challenge network of folks who are working on it from private sector universities and from cities and states and the federal government. So I hope you'll join us in work in the future. So it's been a pleasure, and thank you, Lan, for having us.
Thank you, everybody. It was a great discussion.
Thanks.
Bye.